Senate. I want to make sure it's official. Okay, it's now officially 6 o'clock, and I will now call the joint City Council and Planning Commission work meeting to order. And I'd like to call on Taylor, Senior Planner, to present our topic.
Mayor, I'll introduce this. It sounds like someone might have their computer on, though. So tonight, we have a fun-filled evening of talking about natural features. We're going to divide this into two separate work sessions, think of it that way. We're going to introduce, the first work session will be about natural resources. What we'd like to do is get through the presentation in half an hour and then leave half an hour for questions, so please jot those down as you go. And then we will migrate over to, and Taylor will lead you through that discussion, and then we'll migrate over to a discussion of natural hazards, same sort of setup where we will have a half-hour presentation and a half-hour for questions as we go. Just to set the stage, this is work that we started on in 2020 and 2021 as part of our UGB amendment process. This is meeting our Goal 5 and Goal 7 responsibilities for that UGB amendment. And we are hoping we are near to the end on this and we'll be able to bring it into a public hearing process soon.
Thanks, Heather. I'm shooting for about 20 minutes, so maybe it'll be a little shorter than 30 minutes. And then we also have Jesse and Grace from Winterbrook, consultants who have been working with us closely throughout this process. And at the end, they'll be here to help answer questions too, especially around some of the more technical ones. Now let's technical difficulties. Thank you. So here's the agenda for tonight. We'll start with an introduction and then review the process so far. Then we'll cover each key topic identified on the slide, and we're going to end with what the next steps are.
I'm going to need to interrupt for just a moment. Are you aware that this one isn't working? Is that what you're working on, too? Okay. All right. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, so now we're getting into the introduction. We'll start with an overview of the project. So kind of the goal of tonight's work session is to update both the City Council and the Planning Commission on our Goal 5 natural resource planning, to summarize the project process since our June 18th session, then address any outstanding questions, and present final code recommendations, and then outline the remaining tasks. So a little history, Heather spoke about it, but a lot of this began back in 2020 when we updated our growth management and urbanization plan and our urban growth boundary, and as part of that, it required a Goal 5 natural resources update. So then we inventoried our riparian corridors, our tree groves, and scenic viewpoints and vistas from like 21 to 22. Following that, we developed draft programs, and we presented the programs and inventories at work sessions in the following years, with the last time being before you, June 18th of 2025. All right, now on to process. So as I just covered, the last work session was held on June 18th, 2025. Following that, on August 8th, we did a mailing to property owners who have a identified tree grove on their property. After that mailing, we heard actually support for the program and then some requests for alterations to the tree grove. Then we did our agency notification of the proposed inventories and the code language that's before you tonight. And working with those other agencies, we actually modified code language to meet some of the standards that they were looking to change. So then finally, we had 2 meetings with the Landscape Review Committee in December, and that ultimately landed with the Landscape Review Committee, making some recommended changes to the program and recommending the program with those amendments. So now we're going to kind of dive into the different inventories. For each of the inventory types, we're going to follow this kind of template of what was presented at the June 18th meeting. If there were any questions that were left unanswered, and our responses, and then finally the recommendations provided in your packet. So here's what was presented on June 18th. We inventoried 11 riparian corridors using the safe harbor process as was previously directed by City Council. So safe harbor it's basically a pre-approved inventory process that the state established, and it would allow us to adopt an inventory without having to do an associated Goal 5 easy analysis. So that's what they call it in short. And easy analysis looks at the economic, social, environmental, and energy consequences of the inventory, for example. So in this case, there would be a 75-foot setback from the South Yamhill River and a 50-foot setback from other fish-bearing streams. And then most of those corridors fall within the 100-year floodplain, which means that there's sort of these overlapping regulations by FEMA and then within our zoning ordinance as well. All right, hopefully this is visible. What this diagram is really meaning to show is when we're talking about bank, it's the bank full width. I like this diagram because you might think, oh, what is the bank? Maybe it's the highest portion on the left hand of this slide. No, it's not that high. So there's a specific definition of it that engineers and folks understand, but I wanted to provide this slide just to show you this is what we're thinking about with the bank full width. All right, at our last session, there were some questions, but they were all addressed, and so there were no like outstanding issues, at least in that regard. So as a follow-up, in part of our August 8th mailing to property owners, we received a request to remove tributaries from the riparian corridor overlay. So this map, those areas that are kind of circled in red, show places where riparian corridors fall outside of the floodplain zone. So staff recommends to maintain the safe harbor standards as was previously directed by City Council. And it's important to note, and we'll get into this in a little more detail later, but there are relief mechanisms for hardship cases such as like density transfer, variances, zoning alterations that could help someone if their property is overly impacted. All right, so to adopt an alternative overlay boundary, there's some steps in the OAR that we would need to follow, and this would be work that we haven't done so far. And we would need to inventory the resources, determine their significance, do analysis of the uses, prepare an easy analysis, and then adopt that new analysis. So this is all work that would need to be added to the project, and this would require additional time and resources to do. So we can adopt alternative boundaries, but if we wanted to do that, there would need to be additional work done. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't really introduce it. It's kind of hard to see, but in the upper right-hand corner of the screen are the code sections we're talking about and the chapter as well, if you want a little reference back. So we recommend using the Safe Harbor Management Standards, just like and continue as directed by council. So these standards propose to set clear limits on what could happen in the riparian corridor. Permanent alterations are limited, but there are certain low impact uses that would be permitted. And vegetation removal is controlled. And then for properties that are facing challenges with development, there are relief mechanisms to allow for that development. And those all fall in those sections of the code that are listed kind of at the top of the list. Great. So now moving on to significant tree groves. So these areas help provide shade, habitat, they minimize runoff, improve water quality, and contribute to McMinnville's character. Again, we're going to follow the similar pattern to before. So looking back at the June work session, we identified 30 groves and assessed them using a point system to determine in the end that 27 groves are deemed significant. A tree grove must meet the height requirements and size requirements as identified on the slide. And then we graded across 10 different characteristics from like grove maturity to accessibility, rarity, recreational potential, other standards as well, to determine their value. And then at the time, we were working on the easy analysis that was required for this program. So there were a couple of questions left unanswered at the planning at the last joint workshop. I kind of summarized the questions here. I'll describe them in better detail. So one was, if there's an economic hardship on the property because of a tree grove, can you alter it? And then a second portion of the question was, are these just going to be subjective standards? What would this really look like? So there is this alternative process that would be allowed through a variance that has some additional standards to the typical variance. And right now, just like typical variances, it would be reviewed by the Planning Commission, and there's specific criteria that they need to meet. So there's going to be some discretion by the Planning Commission when they're making their decision, but there's pretty set guidelines, so there are some rules at play. Another question was, can a grove become too small or be eliminated? And it's yes. So if the grove goes below a certain size, it could be eliminated. If looking at this 25-point scoring system, it drops below 25 points, it could in theory be eliminated as well. So some tree groves could be eliminated. And then there's a process in our code that allows for boundary adjustments. Okay, and then here's a follow-up, our recommendation. Adopt 26 significant tree groves. So after we worked with some of the property owners and heard back, actually one we found wasn't significant, and adopt the easy analysis that was provided in your staff report. And then these standards are proposed to apply to all development on lots that contain a significant tree grove, as long as the trunk of that tree is on the property. So if the tree is hanging over from someone else's property onto your own, you're not subject to those standards. And then exceptions are proposed for both private properties and then for city projects. And the details of that can be found in the code. Then there's development standards that are being proposed. So permanent alterations not allowed unless in certain limited circumstances. For vegetation management, if removal is required, it needs to be replaced by a native. And finally, as with the riparian corridors, there's some relief mechanisms. So like reducing setbacks, density transfer, variances, doing mapping corrections, that would allow for a lot to be developed. All right, now we're on to individual trees. Before we were talking about groups of trees, and now we're looking at individual trees. So at the June 18th work session, there was 2 tree categories that were proposed, landmark and significant. And these special trees would apply to on both private and public property. The slide, you could see the proposed size that would define a tree as one of those 2 trees. And a landmark tree is the bigger of the 2 trees. And in both cases, it allows for the excluding of nuisance, dead, disease, or dangerous trees. The arborist report was provided, and the city accepted that report. And FYI, I don't know, DBH, as we kind of see on some of these slides, means diameter at breast height. So that would be at 4.5 feet, the size of the tree. So that's where we're talking about when we say that if a tree was over 36 inches, DBH means at 4.5 feet, the diameter of the tree is 3 feet. Okay. So there were a couple of questions at the meeting. This is where a lot of the work was done with the Landscape Review Committee, actually. This first question is kind of summarizing, but one of it was, right now we have a current fee for removing a tree, and it's pretty high. And was wondering if we could reduce the tree, but at the same time consider the kind of the intent of the remover, or almost the maliciousness. So is there someone who just has no idea that this standard applies and they remove the tree, oops? Or is there someone who spoke with the city and then went and did it anyways? And what we're proposing is allowing the director to choose between a class 1 to a class 3 violation. And right now that fee is $1,000 to $5,000 per tree. And it would just give the director the ability to make that determination based off of the history of what's happened. The second question was what burden should be placed on private property, especially for the removal of individual trees? And how would the program be managed? What impact would that have on staff resources? So that's where a lot of work was done with the Landscape Review Committee. So what the Landscape Review Committee came to recommend was still look at having landmark and significant trees, but landmark trees would just become a list where a property owner could apply to have a tree designated as a landmark tree on their property. So it's completely voluntary, and it would be something maintained by the city. Significant trees would have their size increased, so it would now be 36 inches DBH would be a significant tree, or 20 inches DBH for a white oak. And it would still apply to all trees on public and private land. And then there's a number of exceptions that were proposed by the Landscape Review Committee. So one of them would be small residential parcels under 20,000 square feet. If they have a single family or middle housing project on their site now, or a building permit approved, or building permit underway for it, they would not require a permit for removal. They could remove as many as they wanted to. For undeveloped parcels, they could remove up to 2 a calendar year. And then we're kind of keeping that same thing about a hazardous disease dead nuisance tree as approved by an arborist. And then if a tree did not require a permit for removal, then there would be no replacement needed. So now on the right-hand side, you could see if a replacement is needed, that generally they would need to replant 3 smaller trees for each tree removed. And then in the case of a landmark tree, there would be an additional fee. They could plant on-site or off-site, or pay be in lieu of planting, kind of depending on the situation of their property, because some properties might not really have space to plant those trees if needed. And the 3-to-1 replacement came from the Landscape Review Committee. They felt it was important because our current code, as proposed, would require the replacement tree to be 2 inches in diameter at 6 inches above the ground. So these are pretty small trees. And they felt if we're losing a 36-inch tree, then it would be appropriate to require the planting of 3 trees to get a little bit of the canopy coverage back earlier compared to what was there before. Again, these standards are discretionary to what you all feel is best. All right, I'll move a little faster now. We're getting to the scenic viewpoint of view sheds. So back in June 18, there was, we identified basically through comprehensive plan policies and area planning, we would look to protect 16 viewpoints and view sheds. And really, it was looking at things like street layout or design of open space, not a ton of regulatory aspects or regulatory aspects at time of like a building permit development. And then as part of a public update, consideration of that for amendments to the park master plans and public facilities. So again, this is more like planning stage than an individual site development stage. And here you could see, or maybe you can't quite see, the different view sheds in the upper map. And then here's kind of an example of what a view shed meant when we were doing the analysis. And so there were no unanswered questions from the June 18th workshop, and we just recommend adopting the scenic viewpoint program as presented. All right, so now to next steps. So Measure 56 notifications must be sent to all property owners that would be impacted by the project, and we would need to do a DLCD notice. So both of these have time frames that are required, and that's why we're recommending, if you all would like to move forward, March 19th would be basically the earliest planning commission hearing we can meet and still meet all these notification deadlines, which we're subject to. And then again, probably the earliest council meeting would be April 14th due to noticing requirements. But yeah, really that depends on tonight's consideration. Staff's recommending that you direct us to initiate the ordinance adoption process. So that's the DLC notice, the Measure 56 notice, put together the findings for Planning Commission hearing. And then there's different alternatives as well you could consider. And that concludes the presentation. I'm happy to take any questions. As I mentioned earlier, we have Jesse and Grace from Winterbrook here that could help answer questions as well. Thank you.
Okay, anybody have any questions they want to start? Okay, go ahead.
All right. I've got a few questions. First and foremost, I'm kind of curious how and why, so when we sent that notice out to property owners for the significant tree groves, and one was able to decline participation, how and why is that an option?
So we decided, based on the way we did the inventory originally, which was some field verification aerials, that sort of thing, we decided to go back, and that was done in 2020. We decided to go back to the property owners that had tree groves and just give them the opportunity to verify that it was meeting the criteria of the methodology. And so they had the opportunity to say yes or no, you got this wrong, this is actually only 2 trees deep and not 3 trees deep, and these are photos to show that. Most property owners were supportive and actually excited to have their groves protected in the program. There was one property owner who got back to us and said, I think you have it wrong. Here's some reasons why we think you have it wrong. Will you relook at this? We relooked at it and we agreed. And so it no longer met the scoring methodology for a significant tree grove.
Yeah, I think we didn't, using our already adopted like process and scoring mechanism, that's why it was changed, because it no longer complied with that. Not, they requested it and we removed it.
Thank you. Let me suss through my notes a second. So as we consider these tree groves, I guess I'm kind of more interested in leaning towards, not total prohibition, but kind of a stricter protection than what's proposed. Just, as we think about, I think I did the math, and it's like 388 acres is from the inventory, kind of the total acreage for significant tree groves. That's just under 6% of the total land in the city. And I think over time, with tree death or pests or, variances that allow for taking trees down, we're going to lose that. And that's, a relatively significant percentage now, but I think we can slip away and we're not going to be able to build back as quickly as we can take away from that. So it's just one quick comment. When you were talking about the numbers that the Landscape Review Committee provided, when they were reducing those diameters, in particular with the Oregon white oak, did they talk about estimated difference in times of years for an Oregon white oak to go, from a size of about 12 dBH to 20?
They did not. I didn't include in your packet, we looked at other communities and the way that they were regulating tree, like these kind of individual trees. So some communities don't regulate them at all. Some have like a smaller, so this was falling in this like center space of who we usually compare ourselves to. But that was, the basis of it was more based off that analysis and then considering the like permit and staff resources that would need to go into a program, especially if we were keeping it down at like 12 inches for some of these trees.
And just to follow up on that a little bit more, at our June 2025 work session, we heard concerns about the balancing act of private property rights and the ability to use your property the way you want to, relative to managing trees of a certain size in this community and how many trees we have of that certain size in the community. And so the Landscape Review Committee went through that process of sort of that balancing act in the lens of looking at what other communities are doing as well.
Yeah, and I think that's to our detriment ultimately. You think about the ecological context of this valley, and we, 5.7% of our acreage has significant groves, and historically this, area was covered in a lot larger trees. So when we leave it to property owners, generally that's to the detriment of the rest of the community. And of course, if you look at page, I think it was 124 of our packet, that just starts listing the EC 120, maybe it starts a little bit higher than that, 122, 120 around there. It starts listing all the impact, the economic impact that our environmental systems and our ecosystem services provide. And I just think, I'm in favor, because we know Oregon white oaks grow really slowly, and as the Landscape Review Committee kind of touched on, like 3 small trees, it's going to take decades for them to replace a larger tree in terms of the services they provide. And that's not just to speak for the private property owner, but that's for the whole community. And, I'm thinking back to just this mid-December, when we had 10 inches of rain in 2 weeks. I think our wastewater had to pump out over 600,000 gallons of partially treated stormwater, wastewater, into the Yamhill. And so when I think about, I've got a lot of issues with the economic hardships too. I've got some questions on that. It's not
going to let you finish that up.
protected. Yeah, thank you. That's not protected. It's not a thing that we have to necessarily, yeah, I guess that's my final question is like, why from the staff is economic hardship such a sticking point for a particular property owner when, how do we balance out one person's potential profits versus all the other ecosystem services that the city at large will have to pay for?
And are you asking that relative to the easy analysis that was done for the tree groves, or relative to the discussion of the individual trees on properties that are significant or landmark trees?
Let me actually, that's for repairing corridor boundaries. Back. Nope, you're right.
We only did an easy analysis for the tree groves.
Yes, thank you. It's tree groves.
Okay. All right, are you good if I move on to another?
Well, I think you're looking for an answer to that, and actually, we're going to defer that to Jesse and Grace, because they did the easy analysis. It's I've never done one, actually, in 25 years in Oregon. It's a niche.
Jesse Winterud with Winterbrook.
Welcome.
I heard a lot of questions, a lot of different points.
This is about the economic hardship.
Yeah, so why is there a carve-out for an economic hardship in the tree grove code and riparian quarters? Well, there's, if you take away all economic use of a property, that's what's called a taking, and the city then has to pay for that. And so in all of these, we do have those carve-outs. Whenever we make these codes, we provide that carve-out to protect the city.
Great. Thank you. Councilor Chenoweth?
I just was going to answer her question. 12 to 20 inches is 30 to 50 years. Average is 4 to 6 years per inch of diameter on a white oak tree.
Okay.
12 to 20 inches is 30 to 50 years. And the average is roughly 4 to 6 years per inch for white oak.
Sid. Your turn.
All right, just a very quick point. The Landscape Review Committee on page 11 recommended that the landmark tree definition be designated as voluntary by property owners who choose to opt in. But on page 13, when we have the definition under 17.06.045, that's not included. And so my suggestion is to put it in right before the and or the after, depending on how staff wishes to focus on.
I mean, the fact that it's voluntary?
Yes, because otherwise it looks like we're back to takings, and I was concerned about that. And we need to make sure that the owners know that they can voluntarily opt in for that. So if you, and I skimmed all over the entire thing to see if it was in anywhere else, and I did not see it. Oh, did you? So, yeah, I re-skimmed it again just now, but I skimmed it twice yesterday. So if you go to definition on the draft product under 17.06.045 on page 13 of our packet, and it says definition landmark tree, selected trees placed on inventory based on the age, species, location, and historic significance. You can either put a voluntary selected by owner before or after the and move the historic significance around as a solution.
I guess I would suggest if we don't have anything in our actual code, so our definitions are separated from our
Right.
chapters of code.
Right.
If we don't have anything in our code in our tree chapter for landmark trees and how to get it on an inventory voluntarily, we should probably develop that process and put it into the code.
Okay, somewhere it needs to be voluntary, because right now it looks like we can say, ha-ha, you have a landmark tree, and it's going to be, and then it creates a whole system of problems after that.
And I just wanted to clarify, with the landmark tree inventory, it's very similar to our historic building inventory. So the city would not be maintaining the trees. We're maintaining the inventory, and it's an inventory that we would adopt as part of our comprehensive plan, just like the historic resources.
All right,
So
so,
that's a great suggestion, and we should probably develop a section of that
I-
chapter
yeah.
that sort of walks through what that process looks like.
yeah, I think that would solve it.
I do know there's people in the community who already want to nominate the sequoia tree as part of that
Okay, thank
inventory.
you.
And Taylor used the word apply for the landmark, so apply, so is there a fee to apply, or?
We would have, well, the city council has directed us to do full cost recovery for our planning program. I guess I would just say, I would put that back on city council. If you want us to put together a fee, we could calculate what that is. If you think this is something that is of community interest that the general fund should pay for, we can do it that way too.
I'm not advocating for a fee, just wanted to make sure, because designating and then themselves and then applying kind of applied two different things to me. I have a question about the 20,000 square feet. So if I'm correct in what I heard, 20,000 square feet, if you have that size of a lot, you can take down any trees. But if it's 22,000 square feet, you can't take down any trees without applying. Why? What is the thought process there? I don't,
I think, can you bring up that slide again?
Sorry,
So the intention is, what we heard from the City Council and Planning Commission at the work session is that they wanted a certain size lot to be exempt from this process, significant tree and landmark trees. And so, again, we looked at what other communities do in terms of how they address it and came up with the 20,000 through that process. I think the intention is that other lots have the opportunity to remove up to 2 a year of an undeveloped parcel. Is your question, if the parcel is developed and it's more than 20,000 square feet, are they allowed to remove any?
yeah, so if somebody has a large lot, okay, they have one dwelling on a large lot that's over 20,000 square feet, they're one parcel, they can't take down any trees, but if there was a smaller lot, they can take down as many trees as they want. So if you have a large lot with trees and you need to take down a couple, should it be based on square footage of like every 10,000 square feet or something like that? I'm just trying to figure out how fair it is to do that.
I would say
then-
you could remove a tree if it's hazardous or diseased or nuisance.
And pay for an arborist,
Right.
which is that, again, is that fair to that? Just because they have a larger piece of property, why can't they take down a tree
Yeah.
when this one over here can take down 3, 4 trees?
We're happy to follow city council direction. At the last work session, we were directed to exempt residential lots and determine a size in which to exempt them. If city council and planning commission would like that number to change, we're happy to do that.
I'm good with the exemption, but I guess I just want to be fair to the people that might own a larger piece of property, that needs to be as fair to them. So why can't 20,000 square feet of their property? I mean, so maybe every 20,000 square feet, they can take down 2 trees? I mean, I just don't see the balance here. Go ahead, Zach. Scylla. I'm just going by first names tonight, sorry.
I don't care. I have a couple of questions. I'm going to start. My first one is in reference to this. What's the average residential lot size in McMinnville?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't think I have that answer for you tonight.
Okay. I would,
It's not 20,000.
right. I was going to say, I mean, I'd be curious as to what the percentage of lots that are at, or above, I should say above 20,000 square feet that may determine. I also am curious about, and this was sparked by your comment about, landmark tree designations are assigned the same, not assigned the same way, but not unlike historic home or historic property. So if a property is sold and there's a landmark tree designation, does the designation, is it assigned to the property? So that designation continues for the next owner? Or does the next owner do they start clean slate?
Yeah, so the assumption is if it operates similar to the historic resources inventory, it travels the property. The initial property owner who wants to put it on the inventory and apply for it, and then the city adopts it as part of their comp plan, they have to be opting into it, but once it's into it, it is managed in the program.
And then how is that information presented to the next owner?
That it has that restriction on it? That's a great question. It's something that we've struggled with the historic resources as well. So we don't have recorded deed, we don't have anything recorded on the property itself that says this property is a B landmark. And it then is managed by this particular provision of the city's regulations. If that's something that you would want us to do for landmark trees, we could do that. Recording something on a deed right now is about $250, $275 for one sheet of paper. So we would want to look at direction from the policy bodies about the fees associated with this process too, and whether we do that ourselves or that's part of the fee schedule. But that is something that we could do as a mechanism.
It seems, I think it's something that's important. I think that communication and being really transparent about that is really critical and is worth the fee. I don't know where that fee gets applied, if it's something the city pays for or the homeowner, property owner. It is something that is, just from personal experience with the historic landmarks, was not told, did not know.
Yeah.
So,
And we have it on
didn't even occur to me to
GIS
look.
program on our website, but most people buying a piece of property aren't thinking to themselves, I need to go into the city's GIS program and understand this a little bit better.
Yeah.
So I agree with you. It's frustrating for for people to come in and be upset that they didn't know that something's a historic resource and managed under our regulations.
Exactly. So that is an area I would encourage council to figure out a plan for that, to make sure it works. I think that's important, not just for trees, but for property as well. I'm also curious about, there was a slide where you talked about tree removal violations, and I'm wondering, how are those violations determined and who manages that?
So the director would need to be brought to our attention most likely, but then the director would determine if we have like class 1 to class 3 violations. It really goes to class 8, talks about in the staff report. And I think it just depends about the case history of what's happened to this. Maybe Heather wants to talk to.
Yeah, so it would be on a complaint basis. We're not staffed to do that proactively. And then based on that, we would need to do some research to understand, whether there was knowledge of the regulations or not. What we heard at the last work session is if you're going to encumber many trees, I don't know how many trees, based on the size, right, into a program of regulations, not everyone's going to know that program, right? And so they innocently cut down the tree in their backyard that they just no longer want there anymore. Too many leaves, whatever's happening, right? And is it fair to fine them? Currently in our code, you fine them based on the appraisal value of the tree. So that's the size of the tree, and there's a national appraisal value. That, for a significant size tree, that's 6 figures. So the discussion at City Council in June was, we want to have some sort of fee, penalty fee. We want it to be based on some sort of sliding scale based on intent, but we don't want it to be really onerous. So this is our best stab at that.
Councillor Chenoweth?
Sorry, thank you.
Okay.
I thought I would answer one of your questions, Zilla, and the lot, or maybe, I don't know who it came from. How many houses there are that are single-family properties that are under 0.46 acre, which is 20,000 square feet, and there's right around 9,000. So, and then there's only about 1,000, maybe 1,050 that are from that 0.46 acre up to 2 acres, which would incorporate like West Wind and the gated community on Flush Hour. So hopefully that addresses some of the question around like the who can do what, or it's just a small amount of the population. As far as the fee goes, as you know, a resident and a taxpayer, I 30 years ago made the decision to take 2 trees off my lot. Again, not having, and this is like the awareness and the community engagement is something that the Landscape Review Committee is working on. But those were the only 2 trees on my lot. So 10,000 square feet, you're not likely to have more than 2 trees to remove anyways. Like it's just, there's not spacing that allows for it. And we removed them because they were ripping up the public sidewalk. So, and then with the permit, like the fee-based permit for private property owners, I personally would be willing to pay a fee, knowing that I removed something that had value to somebody, value to the community, value to our Arbor Day designation. So I kind of feel like a donation vibe, you know, I mean, it's not total cost recovery. I do have, you know, to Mayor's point about we have to have a certified arborist tell us this tree that hasn't grown leaves for 4 years is dead. We don't, you know, that's kind of overkill. We don't need that. I can tell you instead. So, and arborists are more expensive than just your run-of-the-mill landscaper, right? So, you know, there might be an equity potential in that specific phrasing change of requiring an arborist. I don't know what that looks like, but hopefully some of the questions got answered.
So the property was over 20,000 square foot was my question.
Yeah, so there's only about 1,000 of those within city limits.
So I just feel like there should be some changes for that.
And the 11,000 lots, it sounds like, more or less.
Yeah, give or take. And so roughly, you know, roughly 90% of them are not going to be affected by this code.
To clarify for the record, is that just city limits or is that like 97128 zip code? Because West Wind's not in the city limits.
It should be just the city limits.
We have a little over, I don't know the data off the top of my head, but I know we have a little over 10,500 home lots in the city limits.
Okay. Thank you.
I'm just thinking it's not likely to have outside the city limits something under half an acre, unless it's like Whiteson, because Whiteson is McMinnville. So that, you know, we might get 20 houses from Whiteson.
Okay, thank you.
And I also want to clarify, at the last work session, you asked us about the UGB and management of this program inside the urban growth boundary that's not inside the city limits. So to that discussion. And we had a meeting with Ken Friday, the planning director for Yamhill County. He is not comfortable assuming that role for the county land and property in terms of regulations. He did say he would take it to the Board of County Commissioners if asked to do so, but his recommendation would be not to support it.
Thank you. Matthew?
Yeah, I was going to say, obviously, I think the point of the 20,000 feet is to make sure these lots are buildable. And I would argue that if you have more than half an acre, you probably have a little more wiggle room to build somewhere. Where the smaller lots, you'd have to probably remove trees in order to make it buildable. And then I had a question for staff. It seems like the landmark trees and the significant trees, there's really not much difference in the protections. They both are 3-to-1 replacement, except for the fee. It seems like the only difference. Is there a reason why we wouldn't want to increase the replacement for the landmark trees? I would consider that just because I think these trees are important to protect.
Taylor, it's under the next like programming where we talk about the yeah, so in that, I don't know if was finalized, but in this 3-to-1 replacement, there was conversation about making sure it was a native tree. So there was some incentive for that versus just going from the tree list. Is that under the next program for tonight, or is that under this one?
That's under this one.
I'm sorry, so it could be any native, or I guess I assumed that it would be a same designation. So if you're going to take down a white oak, you'd want to, shouldn't we replace it with that same type of tree?
I'd say broadly, these are regulations that you're creating. So it could kind of be, the 3-to-1 was just something that the Landscape Review Committee came up looking at other communities and trying to establish, again, the similar value of the tree. So the ratio is not set in stone. And then Heather's looking, but we could even go more into replacement trees. You could identify replacing with the same species or with a native. I forget exactly what we said there, but that's something that could be easily added.
One potential issue there would be if the tree is being removed because we have some sort of disease or some sort of insect that's taking out that type of tree, the last thing we want to do is put the same tree back.
I could understand that, but I mean, at the same time, there's a reason why we want to protect these ash trees and these oak trees, and the ash borer is going to decimate a lot of these, so I would hate to lose those altogether, is kind of the point.
Okay, I'm going to go to Chris Chenoweth, and then I'm going to Sal Peralta, and then Dan Tukolsky.
Thank you. So just for clarification on my earlier number, because you made me question it, I ran it again and I put the word Oregon in there and it doubled the length of time it takes to do it per inch. So that might be helpful for information wise. Again, it's AI, so whatever. Curiosity on the takings. I'm glad takings got brought up because that was a concern that hit me right off the bat in listening to this. On the riparian corridors specifically, and when we're talking about doing that to tributaries, are we running into potential issue there?
So, no, so like Jesse explained, we have written into the code opportunities for the economic hardship.
Okay, perfect. I should have started with this. Thank you for the work you did on this. Thank you for some of the suggestions you came back with to address some of the concerns that were expressed the first time around. I do remember them. And so thank you for doing that. Thank you to the Landscape Committee for the effort they put in to help narrow this down. I appreciate it. I would second the concern about trying to make things a little fairer for oversized lots. I don't know if there's a way to do that. But if there is a way within the code to easily do that, I wouldn't want to make it, we need to protect the canopy, so we gotta be careful how we go about phrasing that, but if there's a way to make it a little more fair, I would welcome an opportunity to hear that. What is the expected capacity needed for the tree removal code?
Meaning what, staff
Capacity,
resources?
yeah.
And-
What's the increase that you're expecting as a result of this?
For the significant tree and landmark tree
Correct.
discussion? I don't think we have, so I don't think we would have additional capacity needs from our existing needs. And the reason for that is we simplified our process for tree removals a year and a half ago, apparently. And so because of that simplification, it is a lot easier to manage a tree removal program than it was previous to that.
Okay, good. That's obviously one of our concerns, given the budget
Oh, mine too.
discussions that we've, yeah, I'm sure. All right, so with that, like I said, I appreciate the hard work that went into prepping this. I think you guys did a good job on the research side, so I'm not going to nickel and dime you. Thank you.
Counselor Peralta?
Thank you, Mayor. I definitely want to second the comments in terms of appreciation for the work that you did. This definitely exceeds what my expectations were in terms of just all the analysis and details, so thank you to the consulting group and to the staff that did the work. I am mindful of the conversation that I've heard about takings and about the difference between say a 20,000-foot lot versus a bigger lot. And I'm wondering if we didn't maybe go a little bit too far in the direction with respect to removing any requirements on the smaller lot size, because that's basically 90% of the city. I can appreciate not wanting to be terribly heavy-handed on the other side of that. And I'm wondering if there's some kind of middle ground where we can maybe more broadly expand protections for, say, certain desirable trees like an Oregon white oak that takes so long to grow across the city, but then keep the lesser restrictions for most of the other trees that we're talking about in the canopy that are much faster growing and don't have the same cultural significance. So that's really a question for, I think, the policymaking body, but I wanted to throw that out there as something that I'm very mindful of, because what got me initially interested in and motivating the desire to protect these canopies was sort of twofold. One is that as the climate here continues to get hotter and drier in the summer, it's going to be a lot harder to grow trees in the community. So protecting what we have in the older trees makes a lot of sense. And then secondarily, you know, white oak, 98% of that habitat is gone from the Willamette Valley now. And given the amount of time that it takes them to regrow, they're just not going to come back once they're gone. So I can appreciate replacing 3 to 1, but when you're talking about that replacement, it's going to be generations before that tree fleshes out. So those are just my thoughts, but otherwise really appreciate the work. But I do think we should consider maybe a stronger protection for that particular tree at the minimum, and I look forward to that discussion.
When you say a stronger protection for the white oak, there's a couple of directions we could go. One is to reduce the diameter. So remember, we started with 12 inches. It got raised to 20. Or we could look at a different replacement value. We could look at, more penalties for the white oak. I would caution you to the question that Councilor Chenoweth had. The more complicated we make this, the more difficult it's going to be to administer it. And the other thing I would say is the other significant trees are 36 inches or larger. So those also are taking, I don't know what 36 inches would be for, a deciduous tree, but that is also generational in terms of growth years.
Totally agree with that. Thank you. And I wasn't suggesting a more complicated formula, but just wondering if 90% of the properties are not taken into consideration writ large, maybe we take white oak and apply them more broadly than just 10% of the property.
Yeah, I mean, you could look at, and we might think about reducing the size for the white oak. So you could look at that. You could also look at if the concern is 20,000 versus 22,000, you could look at 10,000 as sort of to Commissioner Jones's comment, you have a built-out lot with your home on it, and it's 10,000 square feet. There isn't a lot of room there to change things necessarily, right? So if you have one really large tree and you want to remove it, planting 3 more that are going to grow to a certain canopy may be problematic for that particular lot. It's also probably not going to subdivide in the future. A 20,000 lot or larger could, a 10,000 lot or larger could as well. So, those are all things to take into consideration when thinking about it.
May I follow up, Mayor, before I just finish?
Sure.
So just, so yes, possibly reducing the lot size. And then in terms of the trunk, a 20-inch trunk is maybe a 200-year-old white oak. A 15-inch trunk is probably closer to 120 to 150. So maybe that's a more reasonable adjustment as well, just adjusting that back down a little bit. That's all I had. Thank you, Mayor.
Counselor Tukolsky?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Director Richards, I have a couple of rhetorical questions, I believe, but I wanted to ask them anyway. If a tree cutting violation occurs when an arborist was hired, is this violation charged to the property owner or the arborist?
The violations charged to the property owner, so all of our regulations fall upon the property owner.
Okay, thank you. Next question is, how would these proposals have solved the significant tree cutting which happened way out past West 2nd by a company I won't name at this time?
Those trees were still protected. They were protected under the planned development land use decision, and that they were cut down with that knowledge of protection. So I guess to answer your question, if there had been trees 36 inches or bigger, so we had them survey trees that were 9 inches or larger, and they had to prove to us why they needed to cut that down for their development. If there were trees that were 36 inches or bigger that were cut down and were considered significant trees, they would have a higher replacement value, 3-to-1. We didn't have that in there. And then if it was a tree grove, which it was, so it was one of the identified tree groves, we would have actually protected the tree grove from development. That's the difference.
Okay, so just to be clear, what I hear you saying is that couldn't happen today?
What's that?
That couldn't happen today with city approval? Yeah, after the code.
Yes.
Right.
After the code is passed, the tree groves that we've identified as significant will be protected, and that would have been one of them. And then trees over 36 inches would have had to gone through a more rigorous review and have a 3-to-1 replacement ratio.
Okay, thank you. I have a few more questions here. This is not rhetorical. If someone has a 19,000 square foot lot and a portion of this lot includes land in a significant tree grove, it seems that this allows the landowner with 19,000 square feet the opportunity to remove trees in their yard, but also in the significant tree grove. Is that true?
I think the way I would, that's a good question. I think the way I would read it is at the beginning of the tree growth section. It says that these standards supersede all other standards in the code, but we could better address the conflict. There's that language there that's saying this overrides the exemption allowance in the tree chapter.
Okay.
So we can, if the interest of the decision-making body is no, let's not identify those as significant trees that can be removed, we can clarify the language under tree groves, that if it's a part of an identified tree grove as identified in our inventory, we've mapped the inventory, that the policy for significant trees does not apply.
Okay, I'd ask that we do further clarify that information, because if I'm only reading the 20,000 or less, it seems to me that I can do whatever I want.
Yeah.
So, thank you for that. On slide 25, top right, section 1758 trees, which Taylor, you already have up. It talks about planting trees, but it doesn't talk about maintaining trees. Oftentimes in new subdivisions, trees are planted, but they're never maintained, watered, and if they do die, they're not replaced. Obviously, we don't have oversight capability, but what authority do we have if all of these trees die? I mean, they met the requirement of planting 3 trees. They let them all die, and then, oops, I had to cut them down because I didn't want them anyway.
Yeah, so our street trees, we do require that they be maintained for at least 2 years so they can establish. So we could look at, for the replacement ratio, for the replacement trees, we can look at a similar program and regulation and put it in there.
Is that a complaint-based
Yes.
behavior?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I have some complaints for you then.
Is it really just complaint-based,
What's that?
street tree removal? The reason I ask this is I have a neighbor that's had a penchant for removing street trees, and I think it's taken about 6 months on average, without any complaints that I'm aware of. Of course, somebody else might be complaining, for them to be out there digging a new hole, putting a new tree in.
Yeah, but if they didn't apply for a street tree removal permit, we're not aware they've removed the tree.
Right, so I'm wondering if you guys are if you see them as you're driving to work, are you guys catching them that way at all, or is it completely complaint-based?
I would say it's not proactive.
Interesting, all right.
I mean, obviously, if we see egregious things, we'll ask someone to go look at it, but we're not limiting ourselves to just complaint-based, if that's what you're asking. But yes, we are not driving around the community going to friends' parties and things like that with our regulatory lens on at that time. But you just reported on your neighbor, so. In a public meeting.
Public session. Nice job, Chris. The last thing I had, and thank you for the time, is talking about if someone lives along one of the significant tree groves and they've so say half of their lot, 10,000 square feet, is significant tree grove. The other half of the lot is their backyard, their house, their front yard, everything else. But there's a delineation there. I do know people that live there. They've planted additional trees along that border. And so it makes it appear that the trees have extended the tree grove further into their yard, and then you continue planting, you're extending the tree grove, and it seems like at that point, you're actually, you're discouraging residents from planting more trees because you are going to regulate how they can remove them someday. I don't know how to continue encouraging planting trees while still giving these people the opportunity to remove them if they see fit, even if they're not hazardous.
So if I understand your question correctly, the intent would be to write the code where the significant tree grove as identified and adopted by City Council today, this is the grove, that we're able to identify what that was in the existing condition today, and it met the methodology. So presumably when we contacted everyone, they had the opportunity to tell us, these trees don't meet your diameter bases, they don't meet your age bases, they don't meet your canopy bases, remove those, keep these. And we did get comments like that. But if we've adopted the inventory and it's based on existing conditions today and someone plants some additional trees and they take them down 10 years from now, right? Does that fall into our tree grove protection? And I would argue it doesn't. And if we need to clarify the code so that that's clear, we'll do that as well. Because the original inventory consisted of this scoring methodology.
Yeah, I would ask that you do that. There's trees that I've planted that are large now, 10 years ago. So they were never part of that original growth.
Yeah.
Use your microphone, Dan.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
And there's always opportunities in the future if the decision-making body wants to amend the inventory and add more. So let's pretend 20 years from now that tree grove does meet the test. We would have to go through a process of amending the inventory and doing an easy analysis associated with it. Because the easy analysis is site-specific.
Thank you for the time.
Okay, I just want, someone sent me a question, so on my phone, so I want to, about page 42 in regards to the exemption. So let's take a look at that. Just want to make sure what we're talking about here. The draft code allow the exemption to be used in protected natural resources zones, like tree groves. Would not allow the exemption. See if we can figure this out. One, exemptions from the standard residential lots under 20,000 square feet are not subject to significant tree provisions of this ordinance when such lot is occupied by.
You identify what section of the code you're in?
I'm on page 42, so let me. I think it's
Is the person who sent you that in the room?
possibly.
With eyes boring down on my back?
Yes. Can we just ask him?
Do they want to ask the question?
Yeah.
It's up to you, Mayor, how you want to deal with that.
You know, we don't have public comment here, but just answer my question.
Actually, you can sit up here, David.
Yeah, I'd like to hear.
Apologize, I
I mean,
did not mean
I'd
to
rather
cause a
figure it out
ruckus. So, seriously. Commissioner Chakosky, or Councilor Chakosky, the question I believe you asked about whether the residential lot exemption, that's a residential lot under 20,000 square feet, if they have a portion of their lot that is protected by a tree grove, would this exemption allow them to cut trees within that tree grove? I believe my reading of that, Taylor, is that the exemption for those residential lots does not apply to significant trees within the floodplain zone or applicable natural hazard or natural resource protection subdistricts. So that would include your tree grove subdistrict. So if that significant tree on that residential lot is within a designated tree grove, those trees within that tree grove would be protected. The exemption would not allow for the removal of those trees.
Perfect. And the consultants agree.
Yeah, thank you for that.
Any other questions? Oh, I'm going to go to,
I do have one, maybe a clarification. Under undeveloped parcels, removal of 2 trees a year, is there any limitation on that? Can someone remove 2 trees every year for 10 years? So they're removing 20 trees from their parcel so that they could develop it then if the trees are gone?
Yes, that's how it currently
Yes.
reads.
Okay, is there any thought of limiting how many they can remove? I'm not sure why that's even in there, but like I said, it seems like someone could go, okay, I have a 10-year plan to develop my 40,000 square foot lot. I'm going to remove all these trees over those 10 years so I can get 20 off. I just want to know if there's any thought about that, if what the 2 trees a year, how that came to be.
It's in there because we were asked to put it in there at the last work session. Yes, they could strategically utilize the code to remove trees every year to get to a place of removal, the full removal of the trees on the property. Currently, we have property owners who, before they come in for land use, remove all their trees on their property in a weekend. I'm sure lots of us know which ones we're talking about, but
Well, yeah, but if our intent is to preserve the significant trees, it seems like we'd want to look at that again. That's just the way I'll leave it.
we're happy to take direction. We're in the McMinnville way, I'm feeling like we're getting sort of the 50-50 direction on the protecting property rights and protecting tree canopy. So however you want us to move forward, we're happy to do.
Just wanted to do a time check. You're about 12 minutes into your second topic that you haven't started.
I personally think there's still some changes that need to happen. I'm not ready to move it forward. But how would you like us to, try to get a head nod?
What changes are that you would like to see? The clarification in the code language that we've talked about tonight, I think we're comfortable with that, with understanding what that is. Changing the actual policy, which has been some of the discussion I've heard this evening, we would like some direction on that.
I think when it comes to the square footage, is there a ratio? Is there every 10,000 feet? I mean, I think there needs to be some balance for undeveloped, small, large. Can we do something that fits them all?
Do you propose something?
So like 2 every 10,000 square feet, 15,000 square feet? So that most of our lots are, single-family homes are, what did you say, under 15,000 square feet?
Most are under 10.
They're under 10.
Under 10, okay. So every 10,000 square feet, so that somebody that has a larger lot that may have trees that are there that fall down or they want to get rid of, they have an opportunity as well. Just because they own more property doesn't mean that they should have, to me, a penalty for that.
I have a suggestion, Mayor.
Okay.
Just a thought. I don't know that anybody's, but what if we were to do a certain number per time period? So, you know, if you had one for a 10,000 square foot lot every 10 years or something like that. I mean, I'm just throwing numbers out, but the idea being that you can, rather than just an unlimited exemption, if you have below a 10,000 square foot lot, rather, excuse me, a 20,000 square foot lot, you allow an exemption below a certain size, and then an additional exemption per certain number of square feet above that. Does that make sense?
I guess I would suggest, as you're crafting the solution, craft it in such a way with a cognizance of what it takes to manage it. So it's something where we have to be calculating how many have occurred over the last 10 years. We're looking at aerials for that, very difficult to do. Something where we're calculating, you know, so much per square footage on a large lot. Where do we start that calculation on that large lot? How do we manage that over time? Do we keep maps that sort of show all that? Every complexity associated with just creates more of a management for the program.
Councilor Chenoweth?
While I'm sympathetic to your position, as you well know, I think that what we have been presented, I alluded to this at the beginning of my comments with how grateful I am for the thoughtful presentation. They brought in the landscape committee to evaluate this. They brought in people that do this for a living and our consultants. I feel like it's not everything I would like, and I can hear from others it's not everything they would like, which tells me they crafted a pretty good proposal. So I'm okay with it, and so I just would put that out there.
But this will stay in place, so when things come into, when the UGB is expanded, or, I mean, it's going to affect more people in the future than it is right now.
Yes, most of our UGB land is farmed and does not actually have tree canopy on it, except for up in the Fox Ridge Road area. And to Councilor Peralta's ongoing concern about those tree groves there and how to protect them, not being able to put them in the urban growth boundary management agreement with the county is concerning to me, because I don't think we have the opportunity to protect them. But we don't have a lot of land, maybe the Riverside South area as well, but we don't have a lot of land that has the tree canopy on it because of the farming that's been taking place.
May I respond to Councilor Chen? I agree with you, Chris. I would be fine with this pretty much as written. I was trying to be responsive to the concerns the mayor raised, but if we were to go forward with this as is, I would be a yes vote and very comfortable with the work that you've done.
I would, I'm asking because I'm not clear on the response regarding the landmark trees. Is that an adjustment that will be made regarding my earlier concern, regarding figuring out how that information is transferred? Or is that something, does that need to be in here?
Yes, it will need to be in there if we're requiring recording. For the landmark trees, my notes is we need to develop a program and put it in the code. That's the first part of it. And if the city would like that recorded on the property, then we should probably put that in the code as well.
And is that done here, or is that done at a separate session?
It would be, that would be our follow-up question to this body. Do you want us to come back to you in a joint work session? Do you want to send this back to the Planning Commission and have them work through it based on your concerns? We're happy to do it either way.
How do you want I mean, I still have questions. I'm not ready to go forward with this myself. I think I still had a couple questions about the riparian corridors, but I also know that we have another program for tonight. So that's just my decision, and I'm not the only one here. Yep.
I may have missed this in the initial report, but the money paid out for fees for people taking down trees, is that earmarked to go anywhere in particular?
So you're talking about the fee in lieu of?
The fee in lieu of and the penalty for?
No, that's another policy program we're going to need to bring to city council for some decision-making, because we, for the first time, we have funds coming into that program based on what has occurred in the West Hills.
Is it possible that that money could be then used to record the deed for, the new deed to have the significant and landmark trees recorded for property owners?
Yeah, I mean, those are all policy decisions, but.
Just a suggestion to how to pay for it?
I think we need to move forward to our next discussion. So I personally would ask to come back and clarify a few of these things.
Okay,
Together.
I'm still struggling with what I'm clarifying so that we have clear direction on what to come back with. Did I miss it?
From what I've heard, you guys aren't aligned on the 20,000 square foot requirement and the trees, and whether that should be spaced out more equitably, that it's one tree for every 10,000 square feet or one tree for insert X number. That's what I'm hearing from the mayor. I've heard from Councilor Peralta, Councilor Chenoweth, that they're not 100% sold on this, but there's enough good to not look for perfection to hold up progress.
One real quick here, Matthew.
As a possible compromise, what if it was as written, but if a lot was larger but truly unbuildable because there's so many trees, it would then go to the planning commission as an exemption?
Is it necessarily about unbuildable? I mean, I guess.
I think that's the question of whether it's buildable or whether we protect these trees, and there's not necessarily a happy medium that's written for the entire code, but that's where the exemption would come into play.
And unbuildable because not because there's a tree grove on it, but it has so many significant trees that are regulated.
Or landmark, yes.
Because then you could get development similar to what was out in the Pinot section of town, where they've protected the oaks, and you see some of the houses with the larger lots with the trees on them.
I'm just thinking of people that have large acreage properties that have issues with trees over time and need to be able to remove some trees, and and there needs to be just some option for that. If they have 4 acres in town or 2 acres in town, it's different than if it's just a 10,000 square foot lot.
And but to that specifically to that question is, the zoning is likely going to affect that larger lot size versus single-family residential. So if you have a 2 or 4 acre lot, is it VLDR 2.5? It's, like, what are we talking about? I think from kind of this perspective, the discussion that we had at the Landscape Review Committee meeting, it was more in consideration of if somebody has a 20,000 square foot lot, they're looking to divide that, do a lot line adjustment, whatever that looks like. Let's just call it profit potential from dividing it, and making sure that that oversight and profit potential is also moving on to the city. So it wasn't there, it was done mindfully with development in mind. So I guess my question would be, is that 2 acres or is that 4 acres? Is it zoned single-family residential? Because that's what we're talking about, right?
If it's zoned residential, yes.
So if it is, that's, I think, I guess not everybody's planning to subdivide. We don't know, but, what if they're not? Or what if it's not subdividable?
So,
In the interest of time, Heather, the next subject, is that something that you have to get direction on tonight, or would you prefer to flush this out fully and put this to bed and bring that other back at a different work session?
well, it sounds like this isn't moving forward anyways after tonight, and it would be nice to get the natural hazards through the door. We don't have a lot of near-term work sessions, I don't think, do we?
I'm not positive on that. So
I would-
Taylor, if you could pull back up the slide that has the 4 options on it, and if we could get consensus around one of those 4 options from this group.
May I ask a clarifying question here? I heard Director Richards say that if we put a time limit on how often they can take down trees, that's going to be onerous for the staff. There was another statement you made that would be onerous for the staff. I can't remember what the other one was.
The discussion of if you have, let's pretend you have a 40,000 square, actually, I'll pick a tougher number. Let's pretend you have a 43,000 square foot lot, and you're allowed to remove 1 tree for every 10,000 square feet. Is it 1 tree for every 10,000 square feet, and they can pick 4 in one area? Or is it 1 in terms of blocks, 1 this 10,000, 1 this 10,000, 1 this 10,000, 1 this 10,000, and we have to maintain that map? Or is it, and what do you do with the extra 3,000? There's just, the more complicated it gets, the more complicated it is to administer.
So if I can repeat that back to you, a ratio-based approach is also going to be onerous for you to try to maintain, correct?
Only if it's based on location, if we care about the location of the tree.
Is that an accurate assessment?
Think of what that would look like, a ratio base. So they're allowed to remove 1 tree per every 10,000 square feet of land every year? Is that what you're asking?
Take the time limit out, because you already said that doesn't work.
Well, per year works easier than every 10 years.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
We have to like do a lot of research on, to manage. It makes it more difficult.
So 1 tree every 10,000 square feet, and you're not checking where it is on a larger lot, is actually taking out less trees than what's proposed right now. Because a 20,000 square foot lot can take out as many as they want.
Well, sort of,
So they can.
because that would end the 5,000, 6,000 square foot lots have no limitations at all. So sort of.
So what I was going to suggest was, if this is an important discussion, one of the things we could do is try to look at data as to how many lots there actually are that are over 20,000 square feet and not encumbered by what we're going to talk about next, which is the natural hazards overlay zones or the riparian corridor overlay zone. So that's what David got up and talked about, is there's this other governor out there, which is these overlay zones where a lot of these trees are found as well, and those are protecting through that tool too.
I guess, yeah, but what I was trying to get to is what qualifiers can we actually consider that are not going to be too onerous for you? That's where I'm trying to get to.
Mm-hmm.
Why don't you do your research and come back?
I
We need to
still
move on.
need direction on research.
May I ask a quick question of the group? I noticed Councilor Chenoweth and Councilor Peralta thought that accepting as presented seemed reasonable with, and I'm inclined to agree with, the landmark tree issue somehow being solved. I think maybe that's a easier solution. And I'm interested in wondering how many other people are in agreement. Accepting it as the proposal as presented. Do you have a question, Zach, or you just, yes, I agree?
Okay.
So that seems quick math, like
No
the majority?
Yeah, so if I get it correctly, we'll bring into the Planning Commission in a work session the clarification language that's been talked about tonight. that I saw agreement on, and then take it through a public hearing process.
So let me just ask one final question. If there is somebody with a larger lot, can they come to you for a discussion and an exception of trees or anything that's on here? Is that a avenue?
They can come to us and meet the exceptions that are in the code. We try not to write code that allows that type of discretion in one person's job description, because it puts that person in a very difficult position. Is there a variance written in there to go to the planning commission for that?
Not for this, it's a pretty objective set of standards. It's you meet it or you don't. So there's no planning commission route.
For anything in here?
Well,
No, there's variances. Taylor walked through where the variances exist. The question of significant trees and removal of significant trees, there is not variances for the exceptions in there, if that was the question.
When we're considering for these natural protections, the acreage, and I'm thinking back to the recent work that we did for the land use efficiency measures and all that, our decisions tonight, does that impact the success that our previous work, I think with jet planning, did for that 20-year horizon, be able to meet those residential needs as well as, I think, was it manufacturing or industrial? I forget how it's classified.
So is your question, does the protection of the natural resources change the buildable lands inventory? Is that your question?
Yeah.
So the tree groves allow the opportunity for transfer of density. So the premise behind that is you're trying not to take a lot of land off of the buildable lands inventory and not accommodate it somewhere else. But we would have to go back next time we go through that process of evaluating the buildable lands inventory and look at that. I couldn't answer that tonight.
To answer your question on work sessions, you have one available on 310 if you bump the construction excise tax that Evan has a hold on, and you have the second half of the 318 meeting.
Yeah, I saw that. And then there's another one on 4/14, April 14th.
Correct.
So it sounds like we move forward with the clarifications. Are we moving forward and bringing clarifications into planning commission at work session, or is there a joint work session in the future for this discussion?
I think you're moving forward, but it does have a public hearing. No
Yes.
public hearing?
Uh-huh.
Okay.
Yep.
And if there's something at public hearing, how does that work? If there's some concerns at public hearing, will that come
So
back to
public
us then?
hearings, the planning commission holds them. They listen to testimony. Based on testimony, they have discussion and deliberation.
Is that an automatic that it will go to public hearing, or is that something we need to specify we want it to go to public
No,
hearing?
it's a land use process, amending comprehensive plan to our zoning ordinance, which is volume 3, so that will go to a public hearing, and the inventory is on the comprehensive. So we'll do our typical noticing. First of all, we have to send out the Measure 56 notice. That is for anybody that's in an overlay zone. I want to clarify that, not for people with significant trees. We don't have that inventory for the city. And then we notice DLCD about when this public hearing would be, and then it goes into a public hearing process, and it will come up to city council as a recommendation from the planning commission, as you've been doing the last couple of meetings. Okay. Do we feel that work session's concluded?
Yep.
I lose my time when I get into shared. Are we at 7:30?
7:30.
All right. What's that? Straight to the questions. Straight to the questions. I'll go to questions. I'm fine with that if you guys don't. I'm happy. Not everyone here has been part of the natural hazards discussion, so I don't know the different levels of education. People have been on the planning commission for a while, have been through this many times. So I can fly through the background and get to the question, okay? So overall, natural hazards planning is something we're required to do by the state when you do UGB amendment or there is new data provided about natural hazards. And really what the premise of the program is called Goal 7. The premise of the program is you're protecting people and property from natural hazards. So what that means is if you know there's an area of land that has a lot of natural hazards that will have natural disasters, you don't want to put a lot of people and property on that area. So you're managing intensity of development, if you want to think of it that way. And that gets us through the first several slides. So for the Goal 7 work we've had here in McMinnville, we started this in 2020. We have a natural hazards inventory, just like we do with the natural resources. We had management program options that were vetted through decision-making bodies. They haven't been adopted yet, but they established our natural hazards program. And then we will be adopting a new comp plan chapter, Chapter 11, that will have natural resources and natural hazards in it, and a couple of new chapters in our zoning ordinance as well. So this is your map for natural hazards. The way the program is set up is we have a natural hazards mitigation zone. So what that means is for property within that zone, we want to know a little bit more about the property. We want to do some more assessments to understand exactly what the hazard is before you develop there so that you're developing in the right way. So in McMinnville, we have a lot of landslide soils. So if we get a geotech assessment done on a property and it shows a lot of landslide soils, you're going to build your foundation in a certain way to accommodate that. That's what that's doing. It's collecting information so that we can make sure the built environment's protected and the people are protected. The protection zone is something else. So that's where we feel that there's a lot of natural hazards and there's a lot of vulnerability for the people and the property that will be on there. So that's actually more restrictive. It's limiting the amount of development happening in that area. And there is a program that the Planning Commission worked on through their public hearing processes to transfer the density that we're removing from that area so that it can be applied somewhere else. So that's, again, that gets back to that question of equity. If you're going to limit development on someone's property, how do you bring equity to that limitation somewhere else? The other thing about the protection zone to be aware of is a lot of it is in our floodplain. Our floodplain is already adopted. It manages what can be built there. Very little can be built in our floodplain today. And so anything that falls into the protection zone from this process, it's not changing because we're limiting development as well. The floodplain's actually limiting it more than anything else. I also want to share with you that again, this will only be for property that's within the city of McMinnville limits. It will not be for property in the UGB, even though we're aware of the hazards there, because it will not be part of a UGB management program with the county. When land comes into the city for development, then we'll be using this map to sort of go through that process of mitigation and protection. So you don't need to learn about the history. We've been doing hazard planning in McMinnville since 1981. It's in our comp plan today, a lot of methodology and inventory, and that's what created our floodplain zone. Our floodplain zone's kind of unique in McMinnville where we don't allow development. A lot of communities that had pressure for land use efficiencies do allow development in the floodplain zone. But now, recently, we've had a lawsuit settlement with Endangered Species Act in Oregon, and you can no longer allow development in your floodplain zone. So actually, McMinnville's sitting in a pretty good place relative to that. The natural hazard planning builds on a foundation of other efforts that have been adopted. So the first one was Yamhill County has a natural hazard mitigation plan. There's a McMinnville section of that. It then directs McMinnville to go through this process that we're in right now, which is inventory and protection and planning regulations. There's a state natural hazards mitigation plan that was done in 2020. They're actually updating it right now. They do that every 5 years. And what that did was it brought in a different discussion which looked at social vulnerability. So when we're measuring risk on these properties as to what's the risk to people there in terms of hazards, we've now brought in this additional scoring method, which is what is the risk to people of vulnerable populations, and understanding that and then developing a regulatory program based on that. Just so you know, because I think this is interesting for people, but the state's natural hazards mitigation plan rated everything for Yamhill County in terms of risk. So we have a high risk of floods. We have a very high risk associated with earthquakes because of the types of soils we have. We have a very high risk for landslides. And for people to understand the landslide, we had a lot of discussion about this at the Planning Commission. It's based on the geometry of the slope, the actual material, soil materials that are on the ground, and then how much water is collected underneath that. So we collected data in 2020 in terms of hazard mapping. I won't go through this. I'll fly through these ones because I want to get to the questions. But this is how we learned that we have hazards here. This is the new data that we went through. And based on that, and we collected data on all the different types of hazards, and then we started overlapping them. And we learned from that process that we have concerns in McMinnville for landslides and earthquakes. And that's based on the type of soil we have. We call it soil liquefaction. So it's like a sponge, and it's sitting there, and there's all these little holes in the sponge, but it's stable because of that. But if an earthquake happens, that sponge shakes, and then all that stability sort of moves around, and now you have collections of like big water areas, and things start to sink. That's my soil liquefaction. You're laughing at me as the engineer, but I thought that was pretty good. It shakes. McMinnville has a 45% chance of an earthquake in the next 100 years. That is an intensity of 6 or greater. So we need to do protection programs. So back in 2021, we got policy direction: proceed with caution, because this is new, it's regulatory, it's impacting people. But we also want to make sure we have, we're protecting people. So look at low density development with mitigation measures, adopt hazard policies, and look for parkland opportunities where we're removing development opportunities. So we looked at a layer of everything together. This is that map. We call this the brain map from the UGB amendment. So this is the UGB and a mile and a half around it. And this is the hazards map, all layered on top of each other. To point out to you, the place where we see most of the layered hazards is up in the West Hills, Fox Ridge Road area. And then you have several layers that are across the whole city. So things like our liquefaction soils, it's moderate, across the whole city, that type of thing. So you have this equity of hazard across the whole city, and then you have these pockets where there's layered higher hazards, if you want to think of it that way. So our recommended plan to you is to take all those different hazards and score them. And so we had a consultant, they left for this discussion. We had a consultant go through the scoring methodology so that it was a neutral position of people scoring it. And they created this scoring system based on social vulnerability and these different types of hazards and whether they're moderate, high, or very high, 0 to 5. And they did these master spreadsheets, and then that created this overall risk factor, which you see over on the very right-hand column, which we call the risk. So we then took that scoring and applied it to GIS shapefiles, and then defined what we would call the no hazard subdistrict, the natural hazard mitigation subdistrict, and the natural hazard protection subdistrict. And we had those factors 0 to 0.99, et cetera, to create that. So that translated into these overlay zone maps that I showed you. The mitigation subdistrict is based on medium hazard ranking. As I told you, development's allowed, but we need to do some studies to understand how it's allowed. Protection restricts development. It's based on this high cumulative hazard ranking. However, existing built environment is conforming, so this has been in public hearing at the Planning Commission. It hasn't been adopted yet or sent to City Council. So some of these issues were addressed and deliberated by the Planning Commission based on public testimony they were hearing. So the built environment that exists today is considered conforming regardless of how this code applies to new development in that area. Additions up to 50% of the habitable floor area of existing buildings are exempt. You're going to add 50%, you don't do a study. We're not restricting development. And then the planning director has the opportunity to determine whether you need to comply with standards based on the property submittal. So you'll see in the code, there was that long list of different reports based on the type of hazard identified. That was provided by the state, those reports, that's from their natural hazards planning process. And then what that report says will tell us what needs to happen on that property. So we don't want to say to people, this is what needs to happen on your property without the additional data. That's essentially what that's the intention behind that. So we have geological site assessments, tech studies, and wildfire impact studies. Wildfire is part of this as well. The natural hazards protection zone. So creation of new lots are prohibited in this zone except with a planned development. What that means is we have a better understanding of where the hazards are, and let's plan around it and allow development to occur, but not in sort of this marching row of 5,000 square foot lots. How do we cluster to do that? One dwelling unit per lot, so that is limiting density, and that's still allowed under the missing middle housing provisions. Large format commercial development is prohibited, so large assembly shopping centers and things like that. And then any sort of existing commercial and industrial buildings can be expanded by 50%. So this is in the protection zone. If it's on a steep slope, which is greater than 15%, you need to provide an erosion control plan and a geological site assessment. And if it's in our wildfire hazard area, so that's mostly up in the West Hills, but there's some other areas, you need to go through a wildfire hazard assessment, which is also required in the mitigation zone. So I talked about transfer of development rights. This was worked with the Planning Commission with legal counsel support. But 100%, the Planning Commission landed on, they wanted 100% of development rights that were removed in the protection zone to be transferred, to be able to be transferred to other residential property within the city, but with only an average lot size reduction of 20%. So they also want to control what happened to the receiving property in terms of density. We've done partner agency outreach and worked with all the different agencies. I put in my staff report, we're still working with McMinnville Water and Light based on their electric wildfire mitigation plan. Sam Justice and I have worked through that, and he's provided me with his amendments, which we've accepted to make sure that that's being brought into the program. In terms of public outreach, we did Measure 56 notice of what that means. You notify property owners about this pending legislation to 3,500 properties, both within the city limits and the UGB. We've had a project website. We've been advertising it. We've conducted a lot of public information sessions. We've met with property owners, and we've had 6 public hearings at the Planning Commission on this. What we heard from property owners during the public hearing process was a concern about the viability of the data, the financial impact on the property owner, so what's the cost of the studies required. We reached out to industry to understand that in terms of the assessments and the reports. Obviously, it's relative to size of property, so it's hard to get you a final number on that, but we learned it was $500 to $1,200 per lot, depending on the size. That's for the mitigation zone reports. There was also concerns about having this type of overlay zone on your property. Does that impact your property value, either perception or real? And were there insurance implications? And we did reach out to insurance agencies and were informed that there were not, except for things like the floodplain zone and the obvious ones that are already out there. And then we heard from property owners that are adjacent to the potentially hazardous properties, so high hazard properties, that were really supportive of the program. We also, Planning Commission, put a couple of additional things in the code. They put an appeals process in there. So I'm a property owner. I've ended up in this inventory. I don't believe I should be there. Here's my data to show that. So there's an opportunity to go through an appeal process and remove your property. They looked at the transfer of residential density rights. In terms of the veracity of the data, we invited staff from DOGAMI, which is the Department of someone help me, Geology, Minerals, something. They understand, sorry, Elena. They understand the soils, and DLCD to a Planning Commission public hearing, and they presented to the Planning Commission, they answered questions, and they were confident that the data is the best data available to us. And then we were asked to look at the different types of reports we were requiring, because one size does not fit all, and that's when we reached out to the state, and they worked with us on that laundry list of reports and when they would be triggered. With the meeting with DLCD and Dogami staff, they affirmed we're doing the right thing and using the best data available. We also talked about concerns that we had heard from property owners with them. They had suggested a couple of solutions. So add some additional steps of discovery to the list of reports. We've done that. When the natural hazards mitigation and natural hazards protections are on the same property, start with the assessment reports for the whole property. So if my property has both colors on it, let's start with the assessment reports first. And then apply for a FEMA grant to do localized mapping, because we heard a lot about the floodplain being old and not the right boundaries in McMinnville. We have applied for that now twice and are in a long queue behind other communities for that. So the question for you tonight is, we've had a property owner request to look at the scoring methodology. So I talked you through that sort of spreadsheet, and we created these districts based on that assigned value of risk. So the question isn't change the assigned value of risk to the property. The question is the threshold of when we're determining what property goes into the mitigation zone and what property goes into the protection zone based on that methodology, the right threshold, right? It's new data for McMinnville, where this program's mostly based on discovery and how to do more discovery. So we wanted to explore that a little bit. We came up with 2 different scenarios based on the original scenario and sort of bumped things up. So the no hazard sub-district, we bumped up by 0.25 points. And did the same for natural hazard and natural protection. And then the scenario 2, we bumped it up by, again, another 0.25 points. So not a huge bump, but we wanted to understand what that sort of incremental bump did in terms of the number of properties, particularly in the natural hazard protection zone, because that's where there is the most regulation. And if there was did it bump properties from that zone down into the mitigation zone, where the question is, we need more data, right? So it's not saying that we're still putting people at risk, it's saying we need more data for this zone. So this is the original zoning map that we have. If you look at this, red is protection, orange is mitigation. This is scenario 1. So you notice there is less red here. And then also less mitigation, and particularly look at what's happening, if you want to see the difference, what's happening up in the West Hills, Fox Ridge Road area. So we've taken a lot of the current West Hills out now, and we're seeing still activity in the Fox Ridge Road area, and then we see a lot of activity around our riparian corridors still. And then this is the third scenario, where we're bumping more properties out of it altogether and bumping more properties down into the mitigation area. So you see now we're really sort of focused on a couple of individual areas and our riparian corridors and floodplains, if you want to think of it that way. So this shows all 3 together, and I apologize, we just got these done today and I didn't send them to you in advance, so it's probably hard to look at up here. But if you look at this, it kind of shows you all the little, web parts that are coming off the larger areas are starting to get removed as you go through the different scenarios and bump up that trigger. And then also you have a lot less property in the protection zone, obviously, through this. So our question to you is, should the city establish a different threshold for the property risk scores, allowing properties to be in that mitigation zone rather than the protection zone, and thus require more data analysis prior to governing the intensity of development there? So looking at this as staff, obviously we don't want to, again, we're trying to protect vulnerability of people and property from a natural disaster that has a high probability of occurring because of the layered natural hazards. So we don't want to eliminate everything out of the protection zone altogether, but we do think it's reasonable to look at things that require more analysis and go from there. So we would recommend number 1 if we were going forward with a different scenario. That bumps it up by 0.25. It makes a fairly dramatic change in the overall mapping system, especially those that are in the protection zone. And now we're looking at the ones that are in the protection zone and how they overlap with the floodplain. Because remember, I told you can't develop in the floodplain. So this wouldn't be much of a change. We have to get into the different polygons individually to understand that a little bit better, and we haven't done that process. We've just been looking at the larger snapshots. But that would be a recommendation from staff to do that. Last piece of the presentation is to talk to you a little bit about FEMA so you understand how the floodplain operates, because now we're suggesting the protection zone is mostly floodplain. So if you remember, we came to you and told you about this lawsuit that occurred. Oregon FEMA was sued by someone that we weren't, because we allowed so much development in the floodplain in Oregon for land use efficiencies, that it was destroying ecology and habitat. So Endangered Species Act. And so they were sued and they had to come up with a settlement. And the settlement was you can't allow as much development in your floodplain, and you have to do habitat assessments if development occurs. So we went through that process with you as policymakers. We didn't actually adopt a amendment to the code yet. We responded to FEMA and said, if any development, here's our code, we don't allow a lot. And for those things that we do allow, we'll defer to the federal law for right now, and we'll be working on amending our code. So they accepted that. The legal test for whether you have to do a habitat assessment is if development in this flood area results in no net loss of undeveloped space, pervious surface, or trees equal to or greater than 6 inches DBH, so that's that protection of trees, then you don't have to do a habitat assessment. If you're not meeting that test, then you have to do a habitat assessment. And the definition of development is broader than what we probably think of it. It's any man-made change to improved or unimproved real estate. So it's moving soils, it's that type of thing. So we do have proposed amendments in your proposal as well for the floodplain zone, which is, we worked with legal counsel and FEMA for these amendments, and it is to bring in that habitat assessment requirement. So that is and I told you we spoke with Yamhill County. So for next steps for this, we are at the Planning Commission. We'd like to bring this back into the Planning Commission public hearing. We are working on trying to get our long-range work plan done. And so we'd like to bring it in, I think it's February 19th, right? I might have the wrong date on that, so I apologize. It's that third Thursday in February. And to do so, we would update the DLCD notice with amendments. We would send out a notice to impacted property owners just to let them know, hey, we're picking up the conversation again. It's been a year or two. We want you to know about the public hearing so you can participate in them, and put a notice in the public hearing as a notice of the public hearing in the news register as well. So we just want to get the word out that we're continuing this work in a public hearing forum. So for tonight, really just wanted to get your thoughts on this slide. I don't know what time it is.
7:56.
4 minutes.
Councilor Payne?
Thank you. This may be a little dumbed down of me, but do the scales, the 1.99 or 0 to 0.99, does that scale have to apply to both sub-districts equally, or can each sub-district have its own? So I guess what I'm asking is, for the mitigation zone, I prefer the current. For the protection zone, I prefer scenario 1.
Oh, if you move it around? Well, you would have, if you moved it around, and you did scenario 1, which starts at 1.8 for protection, and current that ends at 1.499 for mitigation, you're going to have this whole list of properties falling in between those two that's not captured by anything. This is our best guess at what we thought a good threshold would be. There's, it's educated, but it's not exact, so.
Okay, just a second. So Sid's next, and then Chris.
Okay.
And Sal.
My concern of moving the threshold from current to scenario 1 or 2 is the litigation risk to the city. As we increase our natural hazards with fire and potential earthquakes and everything, that prevents the builders from recognizing that they need to build to those hazards, that we need to put in better fire shakes, that we need to make sure the landscaping around the house isn't there, that the building, or that the house itself is built out of concrete or whatever needs to be done. And I'm concerned that if we raise it higher, then we put a burden on the city because we have the knowledge.
Well, but we don't have all the knowledge.
We don't have all the knowledge, I recognize
So
that.
maybe to respond to your concern is, and to Councilor Payne's approach to it, it doesn't, the thresholds don't have to be as described here. So maybe you retain the 0 to 0.99 for those that aren't impacted at all.
Yeah,
And, but increase the scenario for the natural hazard mitigation district from 0.99 to 1.799, so that mitigation district is a larger group of properties, and
Okay.
that's the district where we're asking for more information.
okay,
Make sure it's built the right way.
yeah,
And then the protection one is reduced from 1.5 to 1.8.
okay, yeah, I just am worried for down the road for our opening us up for concerns, so, yeah, that sounds good.
Chris?
Thank you, Mayor. I have two quick questions. First, because of that question, David, what do you see as that potential litigation risk?
The legal counsel that was involved in this one is our outside land use counsel. It would be better to consult with her with regard to that question than with myself.
Okay, thank you.
I can bring that to her.
Okay, I think that would be a good question, rather than making decisions based on hypotheticals. Knowing if there's really litigation risk there would be helpful. Scoring methodology, in that, do we have any comparisons on what other cities are doing that are doing this same work right now?
Well, our scoring methodology we chose was similar to what the state did for their 2020 planning process. How many cities are in a Goal 7 natural hazards planning? There's actually more, because the state's going through rulemaking that's going to put a lot of cities into this work. But it would be cities that went through a major land use process, a UGB amendment, so it's not that many.
Could we have that brought back to us, what other city comparables are? Because I think that also might answer the litigation risk. Because if we're following the same standards that other cities are also using.
Oh, well, let me see what I provided you. I've been asked to provide you less, so I'm not sure if I provided.
I don't remember seeing that.
We had a report.
That doesn't mean it wasn't there.
We had a report that was done in 2020 when this was all put together, where we did look at what some other cities were doing.
Mm-hmm.
So let me see if I provided that. But yes, we can, to your question, we can do that. Have we done that? We've done a little bit of it. It's from 2021, so it's 4 years old. And what would you want us to compare, Counselor?
What other cities have chosen for this metric?
Well, every city has different hazards.
Right, but their scoring standards, where their thresholds were, should give us an idea, kind of a base point of what to consider.
I do think, I'm not sure we can get an apples to apples comparison, because our data is going to be different in terms of what we're pulling from, right? So I know I went through it quickly, but what the state came out with as a natural hazards mitigation plan and their scoring system for Yamhill County, I showed you that, in 0 to 5. We used that to help us with our scoring system for McMinnville within Yamhill County as assigned by the state, right? So what we have in McMinnville, let's say the liquefaction soils, has been scored a 3 or a 4, and in Bend, liquefaction soils are scored a 2 or a 1.
I see what you're saying.
I'm saying
I get it.
I think it's going to be difficult to
Find an apples to apples comparison. Okay. All right. Well, in the absence of that, I feel confident in your suggestion of 1, so that would be my vote.
Okay. Sal?
Yeah, I just had a clarifying question. Were you actually recommending scenario 1 over the current scenario, or?
Yes, actually, I was, because we've heard a lot from property owners in the planning commission public hearing process. This is a new program for McMinnville. There's a lot of angst from property owners about the impact to them. There's a lot of anxiety about the veracity of the data, because even though what we heard from Dogami and DLCD, it's the best data available to us, it still has a margin of error to it, a very significant one. And so the mitigation zone as written collects more data so we can make more informed decisions. And so what scenario 1 does is it drops more properties from the, where we've limited development into this zone where we collect more information so we know what we're doing.
Zach? Oh, I'm sorry.
It's curious, the question of the, what is, because the scenario number 1 does take things off the list entirely in terms of the collection of data. So to Commissioner Winfield's concern, that's interesting to me, and I actually would agree with that.
So, may I follow up, Mayor? Thank you. So what I'm hearing then is that your recommendation, based on Chair Winfield's input, was to scenario 1, but reduce that first tier to 0.99?
Yeah, so keep the same properties off the program that originally were identified to be off the program.
And then that expands the hazard mitigation sub-district?
Yeah.
Okay. I would be in favor of that.
Zach, your turn.
See, and Tom said to me, I'll come tonight if you need me to manipulate the GIS data and show how it works. I was like, oh, we don't need that. So scenario 1 would change.
Okay.
All right. Scenario 1 would change from the no natural hazard sub-district at all would be as originally proposed, 0 to 0.99 as a risk factor. So if it's less than 1, there's no risk. Then the natural hazard mitigation sub-district would be 1 to 1.7999. So that's saying for these properties, we need more information. It's dropping more properties off that protection zone into that, let's collect more information. So it closes a gap, but it keeps the same number of properties off the no risk meter.
Okay. Zach, your turn.
2 questions. In the first portion, maybe this captured for everything we were going to hear tonight, but we heard about safe harbor was the genesis of this. Are we doing that with this, or are we electing to go our own way?
There is no safe harbor involved in this program.
Okay. There is none available. The state.
I don't know. It's been a long time since I've been in the code, in the OAR for this, because we had decided on this process back in 2021. I can look for that.
Okay.
I'll just Google it really quickly.
And then the second would be, I've had experience with sort of things that could be considered things that would need to comply with this program in other jurisdictions with building and having to, get geotechnical engineers to provide analysis. Then that goes to the jurisdiction, then that informs the structural to what you do, and then there's a whole reporting in and approval process to issue building permit, and then there's a whole report out process to get final occupancy. Then you do all the things that they said that you need to do to make sure you don't fall victim to the liquefaction or the spongification. What impacts will this, if any, have on our building department, or is it too soon to make that analysis yet?
Well, we're currently doing this process in the West Hills anyways. If you recall, when I think it was in 2017 when that West Hill subdivision was amended, Bob Poskin, who was a building official at the time, asked for a geotech assessment because I think we had some incidents out there. And based on that, it was discovered that there was concerns about the soils stability, and so we did put into that land use decision the need to do a geotech report for the soils out there before development. So that's done in 2 ways currently. It can be a geotech for the whole phase of the subdivision that they want to do at the time, and not individual lots based on how they want to build it. So Holmes is production building, so they're building it all out. And so they can do that. That's reviewed by our building official right now. And then they can do it by individual lots. So he's been doing that as well.
So this plan has no impact on that. We're already planning for it when.
Yeah, it's already in our system, and my understanding is it works very similarly to, if you look at the reports needed, it's all stamped. I'm assuming that's what's happened with the other communities you're working in. So it's a geoengineer that's stamping the report that's coming to us. So we're reviewing it not for, the adequacy of the evaluation. We're reviewing it for the recommendations for the outcome of that evaluation.
Yeah, so then will for instance, Oregon e-permitting, if I apply, it'll issue a flag both to me and to you to say, hey, this house will raise a flag about historic preservation. This house will raise this, that, and the other. Will that be in there for if it's on one of these properties? So then the question will be flagged to be asked at that.
Yeah, our hope is we can get it into e-permitting. We're limited on how much we can put in there, but our own GIS system will have this layer on it as well.
Okay. Thank you.
Dan, you were next.
Thank you, Mayor. I had two things going on. I was looking at the scenarios, and it seems reasonable that you could apply a different scenario to different sections of the city. I don't know if that's even legal, but say that you have a section 1 or scenario 1.3 for everything east of Hill Road, and then you have like a current for everything west of Hill Road. Can you do that? Because there's a lot more geotechnical hazards out west of Hill Road than there are over by the old Cook School.
So if I understand the reasoning for can you do that question? The reasoning would be that we feel that we need to do more data collection because there's more going on there that we have less confidence in the data for in this section.
Yeah.
And so we're switching it this way.
Right, and that's already been exhibited with hazards out there. We've had landslides and things out there.
Yeah, I would have to throw that by legal counsel as well, because the intention of the scoring methodology, the reason we used a third-party vendor is that it's very neutrally based, right?
Yeah, I'd be curious if it's even something legal that we could do. I had one more question. If you're ready.
Yep.
Okay. So there are areas of the city where the data is very, I'll say, coarse. And when you look at how it's applied to the overlay map, it will cut someone's lot into with a mitigation or a protection or mitigation and nothing. Excuse me. Yeah.
Dan, could you repeat that? I couldn't hear you.
Can nobody hear me?
No.
Oh. Sorry, I took a note from Sal today. Sorry. Yeah. Okay, I apologize. Let me start over. There are areas in town where the natural hazard mitigation and protection zones, or no zone at all, actually cut through a landowner's property. And the data itself is so coarse that we're not going to get anything better than what we have today.
Yeah, it's got a high margin of error, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, so when someone has a lot that has something cutting through it, what is it that we're going to do to that lot? Do we go to the higher standard, or do we default to the lower?
No, so at Planning Commission, you guys actually addressed that, and in the code today, as you go to the lower standard for mitigation versus protection, if there's mitigation on the lot, then that particular area of the lot will need to have the assessment done on it.
And who pays for that assessment?
That property owner is responsible for paying for the assessment.
Okay. Those are my questions. Thank you. Sorry about the noise. Yeah.
We did eliminate also during the Planning Commission stages, we did eliminate those properties that had slivers on them, if you want to think of it that way. We cleaned that up too.
Thank you. That's great.
Any questions over here on my right? Nope. No additional questions.
Do you want this to come back to you, or do you want this to go to Planning Commission and work session for, what was I doing? I'm looking at scenarios and subsets of scenarios.
I propose the Planning Commission.
I bet you do.
Dan has spent a lot of time on this.
I love the planning commission. That's fun.
Yeah. Okay. I think the majority says planning commission. Thank you for your service.
All right. So we'll do two things at Planning Commission. We'll do subsets, and then I'll do some more research on safe harbors for natural hazards.
All right. Do you need anything else from us, or are you good? You're good. Okay, I'm going to close the joint work session at 8:13.
Mayor, I forgot, by not doing my job, you asked me when there's disruptors to the long-range work plan, to let you know. I will say tonight's discussion was a disruptor. So the natural resources work, we're going to be changing the dates for that in the long-range work plan, trying to figure out the information that we need to bring back and do, and how to bring it into work session with Planning Commission.
So what work do you think will get pushed to accommodate that?
I don't think any other work will get pushed, but my job is to tell you when the dates change. That's what I understood, and then to work with the city manager if that impacts other work as well.
Translation, he just wants to know if the TSP is getting pushed.
TSP is not getting pushed.